Okay, this is going to be Life in Colonial America, Part 1. So, from this point on, we could be encountering things that could show up as essay questions on your first exam. So, to start with, two basic patterns of life emerged in colonial America, one in the southern colonies, the other in the northern colonies. And to make sure we're oriented on this, if you have your copy of the regular textbook handy, just open the front cover. This is printed on the inside of the front cover, just a simple map of the United States, and look at the states up and down the Atlantic coastline. And so we find that the states from Virginia and Maryland south were once the southern colonies. From Pennsylvania on up north, they're the northern colonies. The traditional dividing line between north and south on the Atlantic coast is something known as the Mason-Dixon line. I don't know whether you've ever heard of it. You should have. And this was drawn just right before the Revolution. Two older colonies, Maryland and Pennsylvania, had never been able to work out exactly where the boundary line was. So they brought in two English surveyors. They don't want anybody local who's got a dog in the hunt, and agreed in advance to accept as the official boundary whatever line they surveyed. So it's actually not a completely straight line. It's the boundary between Maryland and Pennsylvania to the north, and then it bends down. It's also the line between Maryland and Delaware, also the property of the Penn family who owned Pennsylvania. Anyway, the Mason-Dixon line. Now, since we are at the South, as we used to say, they used to say, way before my time, we're going to start with the three basic necessities of life in the southern colonies. Warning ahead of time, this is going to address just some cold, hard economic necessities. Some of the things that are done here are obviously dubious morality, but we can't pass judgment on that because we can't go back and fix it. Okay. These three necessities were evident as early as the early years at Jamestown. It didn't take long for these to come to light. First of all, agriculture will be the means of livelihood. The southern colonists are going to be farmers. There are very few other opportunities available. And that's because nobody's going to send them care packages. There's no Kroger. They're going to have to raise their own food first and foremost. So they're going to be farmers. They're not going to be manufacturers. They're not going to be merchants. They're not going to be shipbuilders. Not very many, maybe a few. They're going to be farmers. Okay? Because they are from Europe, they expect to enjoy a European-style standard of living. In order to do that, they have to have manufactured products that can only come from Europe. The Europeans are not just going to send them stuff, so they're going to have to find something, some commodity that they can produce and sell in Europe in order to gain the credits necessary to obtain the manufactured goods, which is what stands between them and living in wigwams and wearing bearskins like the Indians. Okay, and all the things they found during colonial times anyway were agricultural products. There's not anything else. So agriculture is the means of livelihood. Next, in order to get people to come over here, you're going to have to offer them free land. That was true in all the southern colonies. Nobody, I can call it flat out, nobody is going to take undertake the risks and the expense of crossing the ocean just to work as an employee in somebody else's fields, on somebody else's land. So in order to populate the colonies, the head-right system, which we described earlier, is necessary. So private ownership of land, doled out pretty much free for anybody that'll come, that's a necessity of life. Now, there is a third necessity. This one's unsavory, and I'm not going to come in the front door on this one. We're going to sneak around and come in the back door So follow me carefully here. Let's say that you arrived in Virginia in around 1670. And by the way, this is based on things that pretty much really did happen. So you brought with you a fairly impressive amount of cash. Picture of maybe a strong box with some silver coinage in there, or a leather pouch, something like that. And what you're here to do is extend the operations of some wealthy merchant family over in England into Virginia. They're going to extend their operations into Virginia in the form of a big tobacco plantation. Okay. Okay, you're there by yourself. How much land can you claim under the headright system? 50 acres. Do you know anything about this? Seen any 50-acre plantations lately? I'll just go ahead and tell you that's not enough. That's not even close to being enough. You're going to need way more land than that. That's where the cash comes in, but not what you think. It's not so that you can buy land. Any land that's for sale is for sale because it's worn out. What the cash is for is to bribe colonial officials to let you have way more land than one person is supposed to be able to claim. So you've paid some bribes, and you've been awarded title to, let's just pick a number out of the air, 1,000 acres. That would be an unimaginable amount over in England unless you're in the very highest ranges of the nobility. So, all right, here you stand at the corner of your 1,000-acre tract. You can't see very much of it because it's covered up with really big trees. Okay? So it's just you and your two hands and your trusty axe. You don't even have a chainsaw. Is that 1,000 acres any more good to you than 50 acres would be? Arguably no. The reason for the 50 acres amount was that was approximately what a healthy adult could possibly hope to manage, I should say, using hand tools only, working 24/7, 365. So what you need is the third necessity of life in the southern colonies. And before I proceed to that, I want an economics question. Is that land, it's in 1670,000 acres of undeveloped land, that land worth anything just as it sits? Remember supply and demand? All right, what's the value of it going to be if supply is North America and demand is a trickle of poorly acclimated Europeans who don't have chainsaws? It's not anything. It's not really worth anything as it sits there. The only value the land has lies in what can be produced on it. And for that, you need help. You need the third necessity of life in the southern colonies. Now, if we were in a classroom, I would caution you not to just blurt out the first word that comes to mind. I'd want you to back off and give it a more broad-based economics term. The term I would be looking for is labor, to make the land productive. It's going to take labor. And you want to say slaves. That's going to be part of the picture eventually. But let's hold on to that. Well, we want the full picture, not just part of it. So labor to make the land productive. And here's the hard part. It's got to be a controllable labor force that you can direct their labor and keep them from running off. Because without the labor, there won't be anything to send over to England to get a shipload of manufactured goods back. And if you live long enough, you'll just end up living like the Indians, and that's not a workable outcome. So, outlining this then, in what three ways did Southern colonists use? In what three approaches did they take to providing labor to make the land productive? Okay, there are going to be three of them. Remember that when I ask you about it. The first one is short-lived and ineffective, but it was an attempt, and I have to put it on the list. The first one is the land distribution system, the headright system. Remember that when they set this up in the late 16 teens, the London Company was hoping to hire laborers and pay them in land. You're going to pay them in land. So anybody that paid their way could claim 50 acres of land upon arrival. And they develop it, live on it, that sort of thing, and eventually seat their claim and obtain title to it. The string attached is that you're supposed to work for the company a certain amount of time. So they don't have the money to pay you money, they're paying you land. Okay, this was an attempt to provide a labor force to work on company land, produce company tobacco, so the company could maybe, before the world came to an end, get a little bit of cash flow. Didn't work. The problem, as I may have told you before, was that there just wasn't a way to make the labor requirement enforceable. It ended up just being unenforceable. So, because of that, the king canceled the charter of the company in 1624, and although the headright system remained for the next century and a half as the land distribution system in all the southern colonies plus Pennsylvania, the labor requirement went away in 1624. But on the list. Now, the other two systems existed simultaneously, side by side, throughout the colonial period, in fact, in both the North and the South. Might be a surprise. We will take them in the order in which they predominated. The predominant source of labor in the 1600s were contract workers known to us as indentured servants. The other, which did not predominate until the 18th century, was slaves imported from Africa. So, take these one at a time, see what time it is. Indentured servants were contract laborers. You can assume they're economic refugees because they'd like to come to America, but they don't have the money. It costs a lot of money to ride a ship over the ocean. So, the only way they could get here would be to sign a contract in advance. Ship captain gives them a boat ride to the colonies, and then the captain gets paid for bringing them over here by whoever steps up and buys the contract. So somebody that has the money buys the contract from the captain. He's happy. He goes his way rejoicing. And the person whose contract it is going to be working for whoever bought the contract for a period of years. Okay, they're working off their boat passage. Typical profile of a typical indentured servant. They're typically young by our standards, mid-teens to mid-20s probably. They're typically unskilled. And I didn't say typically male, did I? It's thought that as many as 40% of indentured servants may have been women. And this is not necessarily quite the same as the program where you go over having a grade in advance to become the wife of whoever paid your way, if you're a woman. But they'd be put to work doing women's work, cooking, cleaning, etc. So typically young, typically unskilled. There were some skilled ones who did come later. Died. Also typically single. But I'm going to guess that the number of people who signed on and came over as an indentured servant to escape from a bad marriage is probably not zero. Okay. How long a time would you be working? The typical generalization is 7 years, but there's a lot of local variation on that. You'd be working off the contract in about 7 years. Now, the words they used, once again, don't help us. You could be a lifetime slave and you're called a servant. You're an indentured servant, but you're called a servant too. Whichever you are, you work for a master. You can be bought, sold, rented, inherited, won or lost in a game of chance. The only difference really is that if you're a lifetime slave, that's it. You're not ever going to be anything else. If you're an indentured servant, you have a chance of being free.